What's up, guys? It is Everett here from Triple Mint Real Estate, and I wanted to talk to you all about, do you need a law attorney when it comes to doing a real estate transaction here in New York City? I wanted you to hear it straight from the horse's mouth today, and that's why I brought over Marc and Scott Scolnik from Marc Scott Law, who really get into the details about what they're actually going to do when they're working with you to make your transaction as smooth as possible. I hope this video is helpful for you, but if you do like it, please hit the like button at the bottom and subscribe for even more content in the future. Thanks so much, and let's get underway. All right, so what's up, guys? This is Marc and Scott here from Scolnick Law, and I wanted to bring them on today because they are obviously real estate attorneys, but here to really help guide you guys through the process when you're looking to make a purchase or even sell a home.
Hey, Everett, thank you for having us. I think Marc's going to start it off.
Yeah, appreciate you having us on. We handle all the types of real estate, including transactional, which will be the primary focus of today's.
I'm Scott Scolnik. I'm a senior paralegal here at the law office of Marc Scolnik. I actually primarily handle most of the transactional real estate work that comes through our office. That's buying and selling residential properties, as well as condos, co-ops, etc. We are very familiar with the process, and like Marc said, we're happy to answer any questions that you have today, and hopefully we can assist any potential buyers and sellers down the road.
Our primary office is in Kew Gardens, Queens, New York. We have a location on Long Island as well in Great Neck, and we are looking into opening a location in Manhattan, actually. We should be meeting with a landlord in the next 2 weeks. So
All right.
we do service all 5 boroughs. We have clients from all over Bronx to Staten Island. So.
All right, well, good luck on the new opening of the office. That's pretty exciting. So let's jump into it. Feel free to spitball or freestyle any of the questions that you hear today, because I want to make this as conversational as possible. So that very first question is number 1, do I need a real estate attorney when I'm making a purchase in New York City?
So not only just in New York City, but in all of New York State, it is essentially required for any real estate purchase that there is at least one attorney, typically an attorney on both sides involved in the transaction. That is because we want to avoid down the line legal issues post-closing, which in many other states where there aren't requirements for attorneys to be representing both sides or even one side, they'll have title issues after the closing, they'll have escrow issues that should have been addressed prior to closing, and because those weren't addressed, buyers and sellers are faced with a lot of headache when the deal was already done. So New York, for all of its good and bad, actually does a very good job of making sure that attorneys are well-versed and understand the landscape of buying and selling, especially in New York City, where there's a lot of red tape, there's a lot of regulation, there's a lot of rules, and so whether you're buyer or seller, you want to make sure what you're getting into. And I know we're going to discuss the different types of real estate that you can buy in New York City and co-ops, condos, and private homes as well. All of those have different requirements and clients need to know exactly what they're getting into beforehand to avoid, again, issues during the closing process and then post-closing especially.
Yeah, I mean, and to put it in summary, it's basically like you just really want to protect yourself, right? If you're buying a property or you're selling a property, it's a huge investment. You want to make sure that everything goes as smoothly as possible and you're protected in the event that something unforeseen comes up. That's what the attorneys are there for. That's why they negotiate the terms of the contract, and that way the terms of the contract are based on what the parties agreed to prior to actually entering a contract, meaning when you go to the showing and you look at the property for the first time, what was agreed at the time when they were at the showing is actually stipulated into the contract and agreed upon in terms of all the legal jargon that needs to be added. Because you want to make sure that you're protected. For example, just a quick example, if you're buying something that has appliances, meaning the property has appliances at the time that you went to see it for the showing, you want to make sure that the appliances are actually going to be staying at the property, not that the seller decides to, I'm going to take the fridge because I like it. The stove is a new stove. It's a Viking stove. Everybody knows the Viking appliances. So I'm going to take that and replace it with something else. The contract's really there to protect you and make sure that what you're buying is exactly what you thought you were buying when you initially went to the property to see it the first time.
Got it. So I want to play off of that, because I do, and I've actually had a friend that called me recently that was like, oh, I don't think you need a real estate attorney in another state that he's in, I think in Washington. But I just thought about that and I was like, do you specifically feel, and state to state, each laws are different, so maybe this is not the best question, but just in your opinion, do you feel like it's just better to have someone representing you on your side when making a purchase like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm barred in New York State, I'm barred in New Jersey and Ohio as well. And I'm going to be admitted in the Florida soon. So all of those states are a pretty wide range of who and what is involved in a real estate transaction. New York probably has the highest rate of attorneys representing both sides. New Jersey, very similar, mirrors most of what New York does, but does have some particular differences. Ohio, for example, doesn't have really any attorneys involved in many conventional real estate purchases for residential. And so you have more title issues here, more issues after the fact, because they weren't advised, they weren't getting that advice. Things might appear to be going seamlessly for them, but that's because they're not being involved in the process. They aren't aware of what's going on. There isn't as much transparency. And there isn't much transparency if you choose the wrong real estate lawyer too. You want to make sure that you have somebody who's in constant contact with you, that's communicating with you, that's guiding you through the process. Because at the end of the day, the client is the one who's making these decisions. It's not supposed to be the attorneys. And in many other states, that's what happens, whether it be an attorney or the title company or the brokers, whomever, are really pushing the deal to its logical conclusion, which is the closing, which everybody does want. But the client's the one who should be making the decisions throughout that process to get to closing, as opposed to others making it for them. So our job as the attorney is to advise them, make sure they fully understand what's going on and what they're getting into, making sure that the client's being advocated for the other parties, and then them making the decisions and you getting the closing with them on the same page as you and everyone coming together and it going seamlessly as possible.
Awesome. And that totally just hammers home the point to my second question, which is, what is the primary goal when you're working on either the buy side or the sale side of a transaction? But I do want to specifically hone into sort of the role that you play when you're working specifically with buyers.
In terms of buyers, just a little bit about the process as a buyer. So the first step, obviously, you find a property that you like. Your agent is then going to make an offer on your behalf. So somebody like Everett, yes, is going to make the offer. Let's just say, hopefully, fingers crossed, the offer is accepted. At that point, that is when the attorneys will get involved. And what will happen from there is that Everett will then provide the listing agent with the attorney's information that's going to be representing his buyer, so hopefully us. And then what will happen after that is the seller's attorney will then draft the contract of sale. And once they draft the contract of sale is then subsequently emailed or mailed to us to review. And then while this is happening, and I should touch on this, one of the main things is after you have your offer accepted and you're about to enter a contract, you always want to make sure you do an inspection. I've seen it time and time again where, for whatever reason, and I think it's normally because the agents want to try to get the property in contract as quickly as possible, and they want to try to leverage their client to make sure that their client's the one who gets the property. They'll say, oh, we won't have any inspection contingencies and things like that. I don't ever recommend that. I think that every buyer should do an inspection. I think that in reality, sellers should understand this for the most part, and especially attorneys that are representing sellers will understand that the parties want to conduct an inspection. So while the contract is being drafted and then sent to us, the job of the agent and the homeowner, the future homeowner, is going to be to conduct an inspection on the property. And the inspection on the property is going to essentially just give an overall detailed report of any issues, whether structurally or cosmetically, that are going on with the property. The main things, obviously, you want to make sure that the roof's in good condition, that the appliances are working, that the furnace and the hot water heater, the AC, everything that's supposed to be working that is material to the property. And what I mean by material is that it's necessary that it has to be working for the property to actually be in the condition where it's habitable and you can live in it. You want to make sure those things are working at the time that you enter into contract. So once the inspection is completed, if, for example, something comes up on the inspection, let's just say there is a defect with the roof, or there are appliances that aren't working, or there's an issue with the gas or the electric, these are things that you obviously, not only do you want to decide if you want to continue with the purchase, but absolutely you want to make sure are in the contract. So that what I would say is the most important thing after obviously the offer is accepted, is conducting the inspection and making sure the property is in fact in the condition that you believe it to be when you initially went to go see it.
You really touch on a couple of different things, but it's really like, working hand in hand with, like you said, the inspection that we are organizing for the clients, really just making sure that things are as they are being represented when you're going into that purchase. I think what also comes up is when you're looking at specifically condos and co-ops. Can you dive a little bit more into that process?
Yeah, so the condos and co-ops, obviously you still want to conduct an inspection. With condos and co-ops, there's something that's called a punch list, which is something that is brought to the attention of the sellers. Typically, this is done for newly built condos and co-ops, where, for example, if the condo or co-op hadn't yet been completed, there's obviously going to be certain things that need to be completed prior to the move-in date and prior to closing, ideally. That way, it can be inspected prior to closing and make sure that those things were done. For example, if they needed to finish the kitchen or they needed to finish doing the floors in one section of the property or the unit, these are things that you absolutely want to make sure are completed. So this is what the punch list is for. The punch list is going to make sure that there's specific items that are stipulated in the contract or that will be brought to the attention of the brokers before closing that will need to be taken care of or addressed prior to us actually closing. Again, this typically applies for newly developed buildings. We have clients who buy units that aren't completed prior to entering the contract, meaning that they're still finishing the units. So if you are looking to do something like that, it's important that not only do you have a broker who's familiar with the process and very equipped to handle newly developed purchases of units that are, again, newly developed, but it's also important that they're aware of the situation and aware that they need to provide with a punch list is what it's called, or basically just a list of items that need to be addressed prior to us closing. That's always an important aspect. But again, like I said, you still want to do a traditional inspection, of course. Again, it won't be the same as a traditional home inspection per se, because there aren't things like the hot water heater and furnace and things like that they're going to be looking at, but they can still make sure that there are no defects with the kitchen or bathroom appliances and things like that. So you still absolutely want to do an inspection if you're buying a co-op or condo. The extent of the inspection itself is a little bit different than a traditional home inspection, but it's still absolutely important. And again, to touch on with the newly developed units for buildings that are being built, because again, this is New York City, there's new buildings being built every single day. So it's important that you are aware that you're going to have to provide what's called a punch list when you get towards the latter part of the closing process. That way you can make sure that the things you want addressed are in fact addressed by the sponsor or by the building prior to you moving into the unit and closing.
And the most important thing Scott touched on is probably that you want an experienced and seasoned broker on co-ops and condos, whether it be new construction or an already owned condo or co-op. Even just borough to borough, since we do represent clients all over New York City, we like, and it makes our job a lot easier when we have an experienced broker or someone who knows the area that they're working in, has good relationships with people there, and is able to streamline the process for us so that when we do get the condo or co-op contract, we already have connections with the co-op or condo association. They're working on getting the stock and lease if it's a co-op, for example. And those things make our job a lot easier. And they're things that should be pretty standard among brokers, but unfortunately, a lot of them aren't doing that. And a lot of them don't even know they should be doing that. It isn't even a matter of them. They just weren't aware that it was something that they do. They might be used to selling conventional homes, and now they're doing a co-op or a condo for the first time. And they didn't know that there's all these approvals and other forms that are outside of the standard contract that need to be completed. And again, we're happy to help the clients with those issues and get them resolved. But when you have a good working relationship with the broker, it streamlines everything, makes both the broker and the attorney's lives easier, and makes everything go simpler for our client. Less surprises, less red flags, less things to slow down the process that could make them feel like they should be concerned that something is wrong. And so it makes their overall experience much better.
Absolutely. And I can't stress enough those times when I am working with a real estate attorney. First of all, I will always reach out like in the very beginning, just in case, just to say hi and like introduce myself, because I notice when we have that back and forth communication, it is just always so much more smooth a process. And, we can communicate with each other on things we might need from each other without even involving the client. Would you agree with that?
I would absolutely agree with that. I think that specifically with our office, and like I said, I do handle most of the transactional side. I like to have a good relationship with most of the brokers that we do business with. We do build a rapport and a relationship with these brokers. And even if I don't necessarily know the broker, I absolutely am open to starting a relationship. The open line of communication, like you mentioned, Everett, is I think the most important thing. So it's good that you touched on the fact that you, even before you might even be in contract, you're just reaching out to the attorney just to introduce yourself and just to kind of give them an idea that you're going to be working with the client if it is a co-op or condo for board approval and things like that. I think that's extremely important. I've found that when you have a good working relationship as the attorney with the brokers for either side, it does make the process go as smooth as it possibly can go, rather than having a broker who's really not involved, not answering the phone, not relaying messages to the clients. You don't want to have that because, again, that kind of leaves the client out of the dark. It's not really something that you'll find with our office because we pride ourselves in our ability to get back to the clients as quickly as possible. I mean, if we're not getting back to you the same day, it's going to be the next day, definitely. But most of the time, we'll get back to you. If we don't answer your phone call the time that you're calling, we'll usually get back to the clients within a couple hours at most, because we always want to make sure that they feel like they're being heard and that we're on top of things and things are moving along. Something I like to tell people and clients specifically, especially that just want to be kept in the loop, is that I'll give you a call even if I don't have an update to give you. I'll just say, look, things are still kind of just moving along. We're waiting for the title report, or we're waiting for board approval, or we're waiting for the contract revisions to come back, depending on where we are in the process. I'll just keep them updated and just let them know, look, it's being worked on. And then as soon as we have an update or more information, we'll be sure to let you know. That way they just feel comfortable that somebody's actually working on it and it's getting done. Not that they have to worry that they're not getting in touch with the attorney and they don't know what's going on and their broker's not answering the phone. That's the worst thing that you can have in a deal. And that's when I find there's to be a lot of issues, is when the broker and the client and the attorney are not on the same page. There's no line of communication. That's when you have potential disasters.
It's all about setting up your team at the end of the day. And I say your team, if you're financing, is going to be your mortgage lender, your attorney, and your real estate agent. And the more communication we are all together, the better it's going to be for everyone at the end of the day. So I want to talk specifically a little bit more about the due diligence phase and essentially that period after the contract has been written up. I'm doing that inspection. What sort of other things are you looking at from the building?
Something that Marc had mentioned, I mean, again, if a broker, for example, doesn't necessarily have a relationship, if you're dealing with a condo or co-op, it may be a good idea, and we like to do this sometimes as well, to just reach out to the board and notify them that, look, our client's either purchasing a unit or they're selling their unit. We just want to know what exactly they need from us, even maybe before we enter into contract. That way, there's no surprises after we enter into contract and they say, oh, we weren't notified, or this needed to get done and this needed to get signed, which I have had in the past. I can give you one example. We've had clients in the past who own one unit in a co-op building, and they're actually purchasing another co-op, another unit in that same building. One thing that most co-op boards won't allow is for an individual or an owner to own two units simultaneously. That's something people aren't aware of. So in this case, we did have a little bit of an issue in the beginning because we weren't aware that that was the case for this specific co-op, and we had assumed that our client, who actually didn't have a broker, unfortunately, so we kind of had to take that role as the broker, which is, again, one of the reasons why I think it's so valuable to have a broker. Again, you are paying the commission, but the money that you're paying the commission really, at the end of the day, isn't much compared to the troubles that you'll have, especially with co-op or condo sale or purchase, if you don't have a broker representing. Especially in these types of transactions, the brokers are heavily involved, specifically co-op and condo transactions. So I think that's why it's even more important for buyers and sellers alike to understand that. But like I said, just to finish my thought on the two co-ops in one building, that's something that we would absolutely want to make sure, if that was the type of scenario where somebody was potentially just buying another unit in that co-op or that building, it'd be important for us to reach out to the management company or the attorneys for the building to see if this is going to be an issue, and to see if they need something drafted up. In this case, in the example that I gave you, we actually needed to draft up a separate agreement with the management company, basically allowing him to purchase the unit while simultaneously holding on to his current unit. And then after he was done with the renovations for the new unit, he would agree to sell it within a certain period of time. So that way they have some assurance that the unit that he's currently residing in is going to get sold, not that he's going to decide to hold on to both units, which is, again, against their policy. When you are starting to get into these multi-unit, 4-unit, 5-unit, or even 3-family properties that are more so for investments, part of the due diligence stage is going to be getting the copies of the leases and the rent schedules, things like that. That way we can actually make sure that the rent that's supposedly being collected on the property is in fact being collected. The seller is going to have to provide sufficient proof that these rents are being collected. And if they have tenants that are on programs, which is very common in New York City, that they provide us the documents showing proof that the tenants are in fact on a program and that the program is covering X amount of percentage of the rent each month, things like that. So I think those are definitely important factors in the due diligence period before entering into contract that you want to make sure you kind of get resolved and get smoothed out. That way there's no issues after you're in contract and working on your loan, etc.
Awesome. And that really like smoothly segues into my next question, which is, what are some things that landlords or potential investors, what are some things that you can specifically look at, which again, you really address in that answer, but are there any other things that landlords or investors could reach out to you as, for example, when they're redrafting a lease? A lot of people don't know that real estate agents aren't really allowed to handle a lease because then that becomes, law at that point. So can you talk to me a little bit more about that?
Mark's going to actually take this question, but just because you popped in my head when you said that, I've dealt with brokers in the past that have drafted leases. Actually, funny enough, we just had an appointment before this call with you, Everett, where our client was signing a commercial lease that was drafted by a broker. And yeah, that could lead to a lot of issues because, what's in those leases, if they're piecemeal, meaning that the broker just took different pieces of different leases, the law is not necessarily accurate in a lot of the time. And I even had firsthand personal experience with brokers reaching out to me asking for advice on what they should be adding into this lease and whatnot, which I think is good for them to do to make sure that they cover their bases. But really, I think the best thing for their client is to have an attorney review that lease and draft that lease.
Landlords and investors in New York, more than any other state, probably in the whole United States, have more regulation, more red tape, and there's so many laws, and so many, not only just at the state level, but at the city level when you're in New York City, that, there's attorneys, they're changing the laws with COVID now on a monthly basis, it feels like. So I think it's almost required that if you are an investor, if you are owning property for the purpose of renting to other people, you should have an attorney who knows the law and staying updated on the law. Because even in the last year, we've had enormous changes in the landlord-tenant laws in this state, and you need to know them, whether it be commercial or it be residential. These are so important, and especially in commercial cases, but in both residential and commercial, you need to know what's in your lease, and you need to make sure that the lease is drafted in compliance with the laws. Like Scott just mentioned, you have a broker or a property manager or just an owner themselves drafting the lease, taking things from LegalZoom and all of the Google, and they're making a Frankenstein lease from all of these clauses that appear to be good for them and what they think may be fair or advantageous, depending on how they're drafting the lease, to the tenant. And then they find out that 80% of what they put in their lease is completely useless because it has statutes in the state of New York that just invalidate it. I see it all the time. Constantly I see a lead out. This doesn't apply. This can't be. This doesn't apply. This doesn't. There's certain notice requirements, service requirements that New York has that you cannot contract around. Now in other states, that's not the case. And so I'll see leases that are taking language from New Jersey, from Florida, from Ohio, and it's very different than here in New York. So you need to make sure that you're articulating yourself as clearly as possible in your lease, so that you're not violating, because you could be violating rules and regulations in New York by what's written in your lease and actually be subject to fines and penalties. The burden on landlords is so enormous that you really have to be careful, and you really want to have an attorney to guide you through that process. Because if you don't, you can find yourself behind the 8 ball. And look, in New York, the tenant's rights are very strong. And because of that, you want to try and at least keep yourself as much on even footing as possible, if it is possible, and give yourself as much opportunity to have negotiating power and again, just be transparent with your tenant. I think that if you're abiding by the laws and your lease clearly shows that you're citing the statutes, which is what we do, that you need to be in compliance with, I think the tenants will appreciate that and feel like they're not being taken advantage of. And I think a big part of the landlord-tenant relationship is transparency. And if you're upfront at the beginning, it'll give you a higher likelihood of avoiding issues. Now, we deal with issues all the time, especially with COVID now, between landlords and tenants. But again, if you start the relationship on a good note, if you have a good broker that helped you find the tenant, and then you have an attorney who's going to help you draft the lease, or maybe you could have the tenant, we'll have tenants come in and sign leases here and make them feel comfortable. And we'll answer as many questions, obviously not representing them, but just explaining what the lease says and advising them to have an attorney review it as well. Make sure that everybody's on the same page going into this so that no one feels like they're taken advantage of, because that's why the laws were created in New York, is because there were many cases where landlords were taking advantage of their bargaining power in rental.
We want to obviously protect our clients who are landlords, who have investment properties, but also our clients who are tenants, whether they're commercial tenants or residential tenants. We want to make sure that that lease is have any negative impact on them throughout their lease term, and that the terms of the lease, kind of similar to what I discussed with you regarding the contracts of sale, is what was agreed upon when they initially made the agreement to enter into a lease for the unit and for the apartment. I think that's extremely important. Obviously, the security deposit, what the rental amount is, and then other terms like parking, things like that, which certain people don't really discuss, or they do discuss, and then when they actually get the lease, they assume that because they agreed to it with the landlord or with the broker prior, that this is what the lease is going to say, and then they kind of just blindly sign it. And then they find out later down the line that if there's an issue with their unit, or if there's an issue with them parking, or something else comes up, they decide to look back at the lease and then realize, oh, I actually should have looked at this and had somebody review it. I didn't realize that this is what I had agreed to. And then this is going to now become a problem because I just signed something that I necessarily didn't want to agree to in the first place.
Got it. Now, what I do want to kind of ask in that sense is, let's say that there is, and going to frame this point, first of all, this is the reason why I do use a standard lease that's pretty much kind of set up for people in our industry, specifically by REBNY, which is the Real Estate Board of New York. I know that everything in there is up to date as far as with the laws and everything that is going there. But what if a tenant signs something without realizing it, maybe figures out down the line that what they signed isn't necessarily valid or legal? What is something that they can do to kind of come back from that situation? Like, how can they remedy that?
So when you have, and it's called a severability, is the contract term. When you have parts of a contract that are invalidated because they are not legally binding, the contract itself still remains. It's almost in all form leases, which are the one that REBNY provides. And so if something were to change in the law and that provision or that clause is no longer valid, the rest of the lease remains binding. Now, during COVID, especially, but even before that, if there was a dispute between some language in the lease, many times what can be done is the lease can be amended. So there's still a term of months or years left on a lease, and the tenants or the landlord have an issue with a particular clause that they would like to change, and there's a negotiation, and those terms can be amended so long as everyone agrees and consents. So with COVID, you've had a lot of leases amended. I think that brokers have been put in an interesting position because they're the person who's probably getting that phone call if they were the person who was the broker for either a landlord or a tenant in many cases, because they're the direct point of contact, and they may not have an attorney, although they should, on speed dial. And so brokers are being called saying, my client wants to work this out, or my tenant wants to work this deal out. How can I amend the lease? And so I don't know if REBNY has something available to that effect, but we'd be happy to assist in amending leases as well. It's something that we've been doing a lot the past year because this has been very difficult for landlords and tenants. And so long as each side's proactive and forthcoming, we all understand that this was a very difficult year for real estate, and things can be resolved so long as everyone's willing to compromise and work something out.
And I think that goes as far as like even before COVID and hopefully after at some point, right? As long as both sides are in communication and agreement that something needs to change because it doesn't make sense or it's unclear or whatever the case might be, taking the necessary steps and, like you said, being proactive about it can really help the situation. Are there any questions or things you might recommend someone ask you guys when they're first reaching out or looking for real estate attorneys?
We've discussed, I think, the two primary points that you want in any lawyer for any type of case. The first one being knowledge, the same as a broker, I think as well. You want them to be familiar with the practice area, familiar with the geographic location if it's for New York. Long Island and New York City are very different. We handle both of those areas, and timelines, lenders, approval from the town on Long Island compared to DOB in New York City are very different. Fees are very different. Those are all things you need to be aware of as a broker and as an attorney. So again, there's no surprises for your client. That's what the goal is. I always see as a transactional lawyer, buyer or seller, everybody wants the same thing. It's not like litigation where people are on opposite sides of an issue. There's a dispute of facts or law, and one person wants one thing and the other person wants the opposite. And we're going to duke it out, and a judge is going to decide if necessary at a trial. Everybody wants to close. So it's really on the attorneys and the brokers to work together to avoid surprises, which ties into the second thing that I think you're looking for when you're asking an attorney to handle your real estate transaction is customer service, which for attorneys, I think is a lost art. In brokers, I think you guys do a better job generally. You're in the sales field, so you definitely, but for attorneys, I feel like a lot of them, they're in a location, they build their practice, and people just refer them because they know this is the person to go to, and they get a little complacent with how they treat the client. And you can know everything in the world, but if this is a referral business, and it is, just like in pretty much any type of real estate profession, whether it be broker, whether it be financing on the lender side, or it be attorney, this is a referral business. You want to make sure that your client feels like they are involved, because they're not going to remember that you negotiated 0.5% down on the purchase price as much as they're going to remember how they felt throughout the process and at closing. That's what they're going to remember 5 years down the line when somebody asks them, hey, who did you use as your broker? Who did you use as your attorney? They're going to think of how they felt. They're not going to think about the minutia of, oh, we got you 15 extra days on your mortgage contingency. They're not going to remember that, even if it was a huge part and we ended up needing it, and it was a great thing that we did for them. That's not what the client's going to remember. They're going to remember how they felt. So customer service definitely tied for first with knowledge, I would say. And again, a lost art in attorneys, and we really pride ourselves on that. So see, do you have a point of contact? I mean, we have someone come in, I'll meet with them for a free consultation. And typically, if it is a real estate transaction, I'll have Scott come into the room. I'll introduce him and say, Scott works at the office. He'll likely be your primary point of contact for this deal. That's likely the case. And then they work and engage with Scott. I'll be involved and, of course, be there at the closing, but they'll be working with him, and they're getting to see a face and know that this is the person they're going to be working with. A lot of attorneys, they have staff that handle a large amount of their transactional practice, but it's a lot of facelessness, and people don't feel like they're engaging with a person. They're just getting emails back and forth, demands for this, random deadlines here. Oh, closing date's going to be this date, and people don't feel informed. Again, how they feel is very important to them. This is one of the biggest transactions and decisions and choices they're ever going to make in their lives. For us in the real estate industry, we don't see it that way because we're dealing with dozens of deals at a time, and $1 million transaction or a $500,000 transaction may not seem very much to us because we're doing so many, but to the person who's buying the $500,000 house or the $1 million condo, it's their whole life savings. It's the next 30 to 40 years of their lives, and it's a very, very big deal. So you have to treat it the way that that person wants to treat it. You can't just treat it as transaction number 13 of the day. You got to treat each deal like it's your own, and that's something that we really pride ourselves on. And there are other attorneys who do that as well, but there are a lot who don't. And that's a question that I would definitely ask, and you can get the answer because most attorneys can impress you with legalese and show you their knowledge, but are they going to be someone who you can talk to, who you can engage with, and an office that's going to make you feel like you're involved in the process of purchasing or selling your own house?
Wow.
Yeah, I think that I also wanted to touch on real quick because I've had firsthand people, because in reality, once you get to the point where your offer is accepted, which I typically don't recommend, you actually touched on this very early on in the conversation, was that it's important for clients buyers, sellers alike to set themselves up in advance. That way they have things set up when it comes time to either, let's just say if we're talking about a buyer, once they have the offer accepted, you want to make sure you already kind of have an attorney lined up. That way, when the contract's sent, they have somebody to send the contract to, not that you're scrambling around waiting for an attorney or interviewing attorneys or calling up attorneys and trying to find who the best fit is. I think that's something just right off the bat that's important for people to do prior to even making an offer. I really think that they should just have somebody lined up, which is always why the broker comes into play, because typically the brokers have relationships with attorneys and they can refer somebody to them. And typically if the attorney is referring somebody, it's somebody that the client could most likely trust and assume that they're going to do the job. But yes, I've had clients or potential clients call and they ask the same question, Everett, that you asked, which is what separates you from another attorney? Because they're really just calling up attorneys trying to find the best price. That's typically what people do. And to be honest with you, I don't think that's the best decision for somebody to do. I don't think that just because somebody's doing the closing for a very, very affordable price means that you're going to get good service. I think that what you get what you kind of pay for in reality. And I think that I make that very clear is that when people work with us, and Mark touched on this a lot, is the customer service that we pride ourselves on. And the fact that if you reach out to us, we're not going to make you wait, but we're going to get back to you as soon as possible, whether it's by email, which I will always get back to people by email, even if I'm out of the office or something came up and I'm not available to speak on the phone, I'm always available by email. And if I'm at the office, I'm obviously going to give you a call back as quickly as I possibly can. I've heard it so many times where people, and actually typically I hear this from brokers who end up using us for their future business, is that they were working with somebody and they're looking for a change because that specific attorney wasn't getting back to them, wasn't getting back to their clients, and their clients felt like they were being left in the dark. That's not going to happen with us. I can say that with confidence that that's not something that we do. We pride ourselves in getting back to people. We pride ourselves in being as transparent and forthcoming as possible. And that's what I tell people on the phone when they come in either for a consult or, again, during COVID. Sometimes we've been doing phone consultations. So I'll just go over the process with people over the phone. And they'll ask, well, what's the difference between me hiring you and me hiring somebody else that I just find on Google? And I tell them, I can tell you, and I can't speak for any other attorneys, but I can tell you that if you use us, you're going to get what you pay for, and you're gonna make sure that you're well informed throughout the process, and that anytime you have a question, we'll be sure to answer it as soon as we possibly, because that's the main thing. And I've heard nightmares and horror stories about people who hire attorneys who actually, I have an example, a perfect example. I'm doing a deal right now with a client who is selling her property here in Queens, and her buyers are also selling their property so that they can simultaneously sell their property and then buy our client's property with the proceeds. And we just found out today that the attorney for their sale that's representing, I guess they're using an attorney for, they're using two different attorneys. They're using one for their purchase and one for their sale. Their attorney for their sale decided to tell them that he went on vacation and he won't be available for 2 weeks. That's something that, again, is not something that most people are thinking is going to happen when you hire an attorney, but I can tell you for sure that we actually don't really, unfortunately, go on vacations. We're always in the office, so you'll always be able to get in touch with us. And I mean, look, that's kind of the thing that I've heard. It's not, I mean, that's a rarity, honestly. That's the first I've ever heard something like that. But it's not uncommon for me to hear that clients are having a very difficult time getting in touch with their attorney. And I've even had potential clients or brokers ask if their client can actually switch attorneys, even post-contract, because they're having such a difficult time with their attorney that they just want to get a new attorney to just handle the rest of the deal. So that's not unheard of, and unfortunately I've heard it a lot. But yeah, that's the most important thing. I think, like Mark said, it's tied with number one. If not, it's number one by itself. To tie everything back together from what you initially spoke about in the beginning is setting yourself up with a team, right? So you have the attorneys, you have the brokers, you have the loan officers, you have the title company. If you have a team set up, and this is typically provided to the client either through the broker or through the attorneys, because most of the time the attorneys work with the title company, and usually the brokers, at least from my experience, they have loan officers and lenders that they can refer out to their clients to get their pre-approvals and then to help them throughout the loan process. I think that this is setting yourself up with people who have a team around them that's just going to make the process go as smoothly as possible. And I think that's the number one thing. I think team is the number one thing, and that's what we like to call ourselves when we're working with brokers. And the client says, I was referred to you by Everett. I guess you work with Everett a lot, and we'll tell them, yes, we work with Everett a ton. We trust his expertise. and he trusts ours, and we make sure that the process can go as smoothly as possible for you. He'll set you up with a lender, which I'm sure they already at that point had a pre-approval from. And then title companies, we have a number of title companies that we work with, which is something that buyers are just not even really familiar with. So they're not comfortable going out and trying to hire one. So typically what happens in a normal transaction is that the buyer will just end up using the title company that the attorney recommends. And it's important for that attorney to be very familiar with and have a good rapport with that title company. That way, if anything does come up, they're going to get priority, and they're going to get looked after by the title company to make sure that all those issues can get smoothed out as quickly as possible.
And I love what you say there about just because you get someone that's going to be lower cost to you, 99% of the time they're not going to do a better job than someone else, especially in your case, which is why I have you guys on my list of attorneys. I'll give you one more like disaster story. I was working with someone once who allocated the wrong amounts of the closing checks. And, you know, at this point, I'm reaching out. 4 phone calls later, they finally answer me, and I'm like, you allocated the wrong amount to the brokers as well as your client. Do you not realize that? Like, you gotta fix that immediately. And, you know, we ended up fixing it at the end run, but like that shouldn't have even happened. And it shouldn't take me that much time to get in communication with someone. And I understand, like, you know, we're busy. If we do go on vacation, sometimes we allocate certain people to handle certain projects. But at the end of the day, if you're not being upfront and, you know, communicating what's happening with your clients, you're just doing them a disservice overall, and there's no reason for that. Like you said, this is one of the biggest purchases. Sometimes someone's life savings, sometimes their kids are making purchases, whatever the case might be. It's one of the biggest things that you can actually undergo, and it's one of the most stressful things that you can undergo. And it's always better to have people on your side, on your team, to handle it together, so that this way, if there is anything that could potentially snare your transaction, someone's identifying it, bringing it to your attention, and you can make a decision based off of that. So awesome, guys. This was amazing. Is there anything else that your firm specializes in, just so that, you know, besides real estate, if I have anyone that needs you, I can send them over?
So yeah, we handle many different practice areas at the office. Real estate transactional side, as we've discussed now for quite some time. We also do real estate litigation, which can have issues relating to title, can have deed issues if there's owners on a deed who are having disputes, or one wants to sell and one wants to keep it. There's something called a partition action, which can be filed with the court to force the sale for a judge and a referee, similar to a foreclosure. Lots of people don't know that, and in many cases, New York City property values skyrocket. And another area that we practice in, which is estates and probate, you'll have the classic example is a family member passed away, the heirs of the estate then inherit a property where in New York City can easily be worth $1 million very easily. And one person wants to live in it and one person wants to sell it. And so we get quite a few of those, and people will come in feeling like they're hopeless, saying my sibling or my relative wants to stay there forever, and I have no means of getting my share of this place that is mine. I mean, there is an option. It is available. So real estate litigation is another thing that does tie in, and so many areas of law tie into each other, right? So estates, again, if you have properties, is there a will or not? We handle both. Probating a will, if there was one, with large real estate, again, all over New York City, we'll help do the deed transfers for those. If there was no will, it's a lengthier process, but we help and assist with those as well through letters of administration. We do family law and divorce, which again can tie into real estate when there's marital residence involved. And we also do intellectual property, trademarks, copyrights, and the like.
Awesome. And what's the best way for anyone to get in touch with you if they want to reach out?
So our office phone number is 718-554-6445. Our website is www.scolnicklaw.com. We have Instagram at Scolnick Law. I believe our Facebook is the same. And so we're available. You can Google my name. It'll pop up as well. So there's many ways to reach out, whether through Everett or online or by phone. We'll be happy to meet. It's a free consultation, and we'll help you and point you in the right direction on what we can do for you.
Amazing. Guys, thank you so much today. I really appreciate this. It is super competitive amongst buyers, And I just get a lot of people coming to me that are like, why do I need this? Or, you know, who do I reach out to for this? And I really do think that videos like this help not only frame the mindset for people, but also give them a little bit of an inside look as to what's going to happen potentially with their real estate transaction. So thanks again.
Sounds good. And thank you for having us. And it was a pleasure. And like you said, hopefully someone or a buyer or seller will get some information from this that is useful to them down the line.
Appreciate it. And hopefully we can do this in person.
Yep, that's the we'll see.
Absolutely mind-blowing. I love that conversation, everything about it. I felt almost excited to refer my people over to Marc and Scott. So kudos to them for an awesome team that they run. And, you know, if you have any more questions, I'll put their information in the description below. And again, if you like videos like this, please hit the thumbs up at the bottom and hit subscribe for even more content in the future. I can't wait to share with you even more details. And this has been Easy NYC Real Estate, where I make New York City real estate easy for you. Thanks so much, and see you soon.